Check out this nerd. That's me in between basic training. It's during a weekend pass in between basic training and OPSEC, the remainder of OPSEC, which is just really another couple months of basic training. Just a young stud, man, a young brand new private in the Army. Those were the days. So what's going on, guys? So this video is going to be a continuation of my last video, which was me talking about why I joined the Army and just talking about a little bit of the experiences that came along with that. And honestly, that video was much more well received than I anticipated, which is awesome. I'm really glad to see that there's so many of you out there that are motivated by that kind of stuff and are gaining some sort of benefit from the experiences that I'm sharing with you. And because of that, I've decided to cut up the 16 years that I have in the Army so far into little chapters that I think make sense to present to you, and hopefully the information that I can put out within these little chapters of storytelling and mentorship will be useful to you in the same way as that last video. And I want to be able to present it in a way where it's going to be useful to whether you're looking to join the Army, maybe you're a little newer to the Army, or even those of you that have some experience in the Army. All of you should be able to gain something from this, whether it's just brand new information to you or it's something that you can relate to. And if you haven't seen that last video that I'm referring to, I'll put a link to it right here. And I'll also drop a link in the description. I definitely think you should go check out that video because it's going to provide context for this video that we're about to get into. And for this video, I really want to focus in on my first unit and go over some of the experiences with that, what it was like being married at such a young age and taking on some children while being a brand new private and not making enough money in the Army. And then I think we'll end it right before my first deployment. Okay, so that'll be the next video. So here we go, guys. So after basic training, I found out that I was going to Fort Lewis, Washington, which I was really excited about because my drill sergeants had told me that it was a really awesome post. You know, there's a lot of stuff to do there. Weather's nice. The units are good. And I also knew that my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, wanted to relocate herself to the West Coast. She was thinking something like California, Oregon, or Washington. Well, when I found out I was going to Washington, I promptly let her know. And then she dead set decided to move to Washington. That way we'd both have somebody that we knew already, you know, we're boyfriend and girlfriend, and it just seemed like the right idea at the time. And it worked out great, obviously. So I remember getting to my first duty station, and at first, at reception, I was told that I was going to be going to a unit that was already deployed, and I'd be meeting up with them in about 2 weeks. You know, and obviously I was a little nervous, but I was also really excited about that because, you know, that's what I signed up for. That's what I wanted to do. And by the time I already got done informing my family, my girlfriend, you know, everybody I cared about that I was about to get ready to deploy to Iraq, and this was back in 2007, by the way. A couple days later, I found out I wasn't going to be going to that unit, but I was actually going to be going to a whole new unit that was standing up from scratch, a brand new unit. And I was going to be part of building up that brand new unit. So I found myself going to 8-1 Cav as a brand new Cav scout under the 5th Brigade of the 2nd Infantry Division at Fort Lewis. And when I say that they were starting from scratch, I mean it. Like our first formations for the first few weeks, the troops weren't even built out. So all of us that were assigned to this new unit were all showing up at HSC. And the formations, I mean, there must have been maybe 20 dudes there for the entire squadron. And it wasn't until about like a month or so in of that where we started shifting down to the troops. And after about a month of me going to these formations at HSC, I went down to Charlie Troop. And I was in Arista Squadron, which is reconnaissance, surveillance, and target acquisition. And I mean, really what it meant was I was in a unit where we were half infantry and half cavalry scouts. We were working together, which was actually really cool because typically in the Army, the infantry guys and the Cav Scout guys don't really get along all the time. And in my unit, we made fun of each other all the time, don't get me wrong, but it was cool to see that we could do the same mission even though our MOSs were technically different. You know, the Cav units, every Friday, traditionally, they will wear their Stetsons and their spurs that they earn. And even the infantry guys in our unit, they would do the same thing, but the way they would infantrytize it is they would wear infantry blue cords around their Stetson, and they painted their spurs infantry blue, or at least my section sergeant did that. He painted his spurs infantry blue. And if you're somebody who's looking at going infantry or going Cav Scout or something like that, you're not really sure which one to choose, I can tell you from a guy that's done both jobs, I've been a Cav Scout, I've also been an infantryman, that honestly, guys, there's not a whole lot of difference. I can tell you the biggest difference between the infantry and the Cav is this. This blue cord right here, baby. All right, I love my blue cord, don't get me wrong. But I'm also extremely proud of my spurs. So don't worry too much about all that. You know, there is a lot of infighting between the two tribes, but it's all in good fun. You know, we're all on the same team at the end of the day. It's not as big a deal as it might seem. I can tell you, I know some of you are going to hate it that I say this. There's not a whole lot of difference between the infantry and the Cav. I would say the Cav units, most of them are going to be mounted. They're usually going to be on Strikers or Bradleys, something like that. And they're going to be very reconnaissance focused, pulling a lot of OPs and stuff like that. And the infantry guys, you know, they will also find themselves in mounted units like that, but they're going to be more apt to be doing a lot of work on foot. And it's less reconnaissance work and more of the action work. But you'll do a little bit of both in both jobs. You know, there is a lot of bleed over at the end of the day. But so that's where I found myself because we were building up this brand new brigade. The biggest downfall of that was that we had to go through an entire brigade training cycle, which meant we weren't deploying for 2 years. And so we were all really bummed out about that because back in those days, in the height of GWAT, you know, if you were walking around as a soldier without a deployment patch, you know, that was a no-go. It was highly frowned upon, and you just made it your sole mission to do whatever you had to do to get a deployment in so you could just have that deployment patch on your right shoulder. Nowadays it's a little different. There's not as much going on in the world, which is a good thing. So it's okay if you're one of those guys that doesn't have a deployment patch, totally get it. But back then, if you've been in a little longer like me, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Everybody wanted a deployment patch. But that was kind of a bummer, but eventually we did deploy. So backing up, I got to my first unit, and I was there for about 3 months before my girlfriend at the time, who's my wife now, showed up on a Greyhound bus. She took the bus all the way from Florida to Washington State, and I met her up in Tacoma, drove her from the bus stop to her hotel room where we stayed for a few nights before she could move into her apartment in Lakewood. And Lakewood's kind of like not the nicest area around Fort Lewis, or at least it wasn't at that time. I'm not really too sure how it is now. You guys let me know if you have experience more recently. But there are two big reasons why she ended up choosing Lakewood. And the first reason was that it was cheap. And the second reason was because when she was looking at areas to move, she was talking about going to places like Olympia and Lacey, and those were like 20 to 25 minutes away from Post, where I live, because I lived in the barracks. And so I told her maybe she should try to live somewhere a little closer because I wanted to be able to see her as much as I possibly could. So it's kind of my fault that she chose Lakewood. But anyway, it really didn't matter because, like I said, I picked her up from the bus station. I stayed with her at the hotel for, I want to say, 2 nights, and then I moved with her over to the apartment where it was completely empty. There was nothing to move in. The only thing we had was a blow-up mattress and a laptop. And I never went back to the barracks, guys. Never went back. The only time I really ever went back was just to get all my stuff, and I didn't have a whole lot of stuff. Just my gear and my laptop. And 2 weeks later, I proposed to her, and a few days after that we got married at the local courthouse, and my team sergeant was the witness. It was on a Thursday out of, I want to say, maybe 6:30 in the evening. And to this day I have still not given that woman a proper wedding ceremony. And I can tell you back then there was no way, we didn't have anywhere near enough money to do something like that, and we were madly in love. We just wanted to get married. Now, she had 3 children already from a previous relationship, and the plan was to have them come up to Washington as well. But that wouldn't happen for another few months, so we stayed in this apartment, this tiny little apartment. I want to say we spent maybe $400 a month on this thing in the middle of Lakewood, and we stayed in there for a few months, all the way through Christmas, because I remember we got a Christmas tree. After that, once the kids came, we moved to another apartment in University Place, which is a little nicer. And it still wasn't very big, and the kids didn't even all have their own room. It was very cramped, but we were making do with what we had. Now remember, at this time I was a private second class, private first class, something like that. So I really wasn't making a whole lot of money. My wife was working jobs kind of on and off, but it was really hard for her to work because with 3 kids, I mean, who was going to watch the kids? You know what I mean? It was really hard to juggle that. And I was gone all the time because in a combat MOS, especially in a unit that was building up from scratch, there was a lot of away training. And honestly, it felt like I was away more than I was home. I was always in the field. And I was gone for 2 weeks at a time, sometimes up to a whole month. So you can imagine it would have been very difficult for her to be having a job and take care of these kids at the same time. She tried to, like when they would go to school, she'd try and go have her job and then come back, pick up the kids, things like that. But we were pulling it off for a good year or so because honestly we had to. You know, I wasn't making enough money as a soldier to support the family. And then she was barely even making enough money with the other jobs. We didn't have any furniture. We had 1 car we were sharing. And it was tough times, man. I'm not going to lie to you guys. We were so broke all the time. I remember we had to juggle the bills that we weren't going to pay month to month and hope that if we did it just right, strategically, that we would limit our collections. And we were definitely in collections. Like both our credit scores went down the drain during this. Not because we were irresponsible or anything like that. It's just because, you know, we had to use a lot of credit to buy furniture and things for the kids, even school supplies. I definitely had myself a military star card. Don't you worry about that. We had a crazy high car payment, and we didn't even have a very nice car. It was just crazy high because we had bad credit, and in order to get the car, we had to get a high interest rate. And then we had rent and electricity and all that stuff, man. So we just never really had enough money. I used to give plasma at least like 2 or 3 times during the week. I would go after work, and I'd try to go on the weekends if I had time. And one of the big TTPs that we adopted, and we would do this like 2 or 3 times a week as well, is we would drive around the post on trash days. And every neighborhood has separate trash days, so we started to dial that down and figure it out. And we would collect items that we thought we could clean up and resell on Craigslist. And we did it, man. That totally worked. The people would throw away furniture, baby supplies. Baby supplies are always a hit. We would find all sorts of things, especially if you drove through the officer neighborhoods, because you know, they're just throwing everything away. And so honestly, guys, that's a great way to make some extra cash if you have the time and you need some extra money. Just, you know, go for a ride with your loved one. Make the best out of it. Look to see what people are throwing away, and if there's stuff that's still got some life in it, there's no problem with you grabbing it, cleaning it up, and putting it up for sale. You know, you're doing a service there. But anyway, so we found all these different ways to survive. It was very difficult, I won't lie. There was a lot of emergency situations that we had to get through. But we did avoid the payday loans. I did get a lot of Omni loans and Pioneer loans. I don't know if those are still a thing, but we did end up getting a lot of those. Those are high interest personal loans. Wouldn't recommend that if you can steer away from it, but I will say I don't really regret doing those sorts of things because we needed the money, man. And I would get loans for $1,000 to $2,000 at a time just so that we can have enough money to buy the things that we needed to get by in life. And it was hard in our relationship too. You know, there was a lot of, you know, financial problems in a marriage, especially a military marriage with children, can be very difficult to work with. But I will say if you somehow manage as a couple to get through these issues and these problems together, you work through it and figure it out, it will grow your relationship to be even stronger. Absolutely. And honestly, it's just working through all these problems that we've gone through over the years that has made our relationship as strong as it is today. I will also say with going through all those challenges with the finances, really did motivate and push me to do better in my own career. Because I knew that if I tried my best and showed leadership, that I would have more opportunities for promotion. And I knew that if I got promoted, I would get paid more. And so because of that, I worked really hard. I always tried to put myself in leadership positions, even in the smallest of situations. Even when we were just at the motor pool and the truck had to get PMCS, I would take ownership of that. I would make sure the PMCS was happening happening properly. And if there was a newer guy, then I would show him how to do it as well. Same thing with like cleaning weapons or basic tactics. Anything we were doing, I would always try to make sure that I knew how to do it myself, and then I could show or help somebody else how to do it as well. And through that, I was able to garner the support for an early promotion to specialist from my first line supervisor. And I still remember this because we were in the motor pool one day, and I was at my maybe 17th month mark, so it was before the 18th month mark where the waiver was available. And I said, Sergeant, I think I deserve to be promoted to specialist. I've been showing leadership, and I'm ready to take on the responsibility. And he looked at me, and he said, you're right, but your uniform is old and raggedy. Your patches have little terrorists on there. If you come in tomorrow looking fresh, I'll put in a waiver for you. And so you better believe it, I whipped out my military star card, went to clothing and sales, bought brand new uniforms, brand new patches, made sure all my little terrorists were burned off, and I showed up the next day looking glorious. Went straight to my NCO and said, Sergeant, how about now? He looked me up and down and said, I'll put in the waiver. And that's how I got promoted early to specialist at 18 months. And it's good to do that because the earlier you get promoted to every rank, that just opens you up to an early promotion to the next rank. So you always want to be trying to get promoted as early as possible. Now, talking about opportunities for newer guys, lower enlisted individuals, stuff like that, I didn't start taking advantage of a whole lot of opportunities that I wish I would have back then. My first unit, I mentioned in the last video, I was still not always given 110%. I was still smoking a lot. I didn't take PT very seriously. I was just trying to get through the day. And back then, I mean, you really just, it was a different kind of army. You avoided the NCOs because if you did or said the wrong thing at any moment, you were getting smoked. And I mean like the dog shit smoked out of you. It wasn't a few push-ups and then get up. No, I mean, it was like a good half hour to an hour of just suffering. Discipline was a lot different back then. I still have memories of being late to an after lunch formation where the whole company or the whole troop was getting formed up to go to SRC in preparation for our upcoming deployment. And I was late by about 10 minutes. And honestly, I had no reason to be late because I went to lunch and I was paying attention to the time. I just spaced on the time. I really did. It was just a complete mistake in my head. And I still remember my NCO at the time calling me and saying, where the hell are you? The entire troop is waiting on you right now. And I was like, oh shit, I am coming right now. And I drove over there, and the whole troop is formed up with the commander in the front, first sergeant there, and everything. Here I am driving up, trying to park right in front of the troop. I get out of the car, and I just hear, get over here right now. And I start sprinting over there. And as soon as I got to the back of formation, my first line just started smoking the dog shit out of me. And that continued for the whole rest of the day, for hours. If I wasn't at an SRC station, which for those of you that don't know, SRC is like your pre-deployment checklist prep that you do before you deploy. So if I wasn't like talking about medical issues or getting my will in order, whenever I was waiting in line for the next station, I was getting smoked in front of everybody, even in front of the civilians. And by the time that day was over, I got back home and I told my wife, I was like, I don't like the Army. I'm getting out of the Army. I don't like this. Now, obviously, I got over that, but that definitely put an impact on me because it was bad, man. I can't really explain how bad it was and how embarrassing it was. And that wasn't the only instance. It would happen all the time. I would, if you, like I said, if you just looked at an NCO wrong, you were doing push-ups. I mean, being late was like a cardinal sin. I will say though, ever since then, I don't be late anymore. So it definitely worked, but maybe not necessarily the right way to go about it. But it's a big different Army now, guys. I wouldn't worry about that threat as much nowadays. There are much more professional methods now to handle a situation like that. But I still think there is something to be said to the method of, hey, private, I can either smoke you for an hour or I can give you this paperwork to sign. Which one do you want? Because I'll tell you right now, I'll take the smoking for an hour any day of the week. But anyway, no big deal. I do remember before our deployment, a few months before our deployment, so this is about a year and a half into being in the Army at this point, I was still exceeding the standard enough so that I was standing out to the platoon sergeant, and it was enough where a sapper school slot came up. And I didn't really know how the whole schools system worked, just being a specialist at the time. I didn't really understand it all. I just knew that there was a sapper school slot available, and my platoon sergeant asked me if I wanted it. The only catch would be that I would leave like a month earlier than deployment for the school, and then I'd have to catch up with everybody on deployment on the back end. So I'd be leaving my family a month earlier and still have to go do a 12-month rotation in Afghanistan. So we talked about it. My wife actually came into the unit. Platoon sergeant sat down with her. We all figured it out, and she was all on board with it. She wanted to support the mission. She wanted to support my goals, and it was decided that I would be able to go to sapper school. But long story short, that didn't end up happening. The slot ended up going to somebody else, and I was told that they didn't want to lose me for the first portion of the deployment, so it just didn't work out. But in retrospect, that was a good thing because I really did need to spend every moment I possibly could with my family, especially since around that time, me and my wife decided to have another baby. And she had already had her tubes tied, so we had to go and get a procedure to make them untied in order to make this happen. And we made it happen. After the procedure was done, she had about a 25% chance of getting pregnant. I want to say it was 4 weeks later, she was pregnant, right before I left for deployment. So yes, I left to Afghanistan, leaving my wife pregnant. And I was going to be gone for 12 months. And back then, that was a super common thing to do. Maybe not the best thing to do, but it was definitely common. And at the time, it was kind of an ultimatum because my wife was 30 years old. And when we brought up having another baby, I still remember driving by Madigan Hospital when we were having this conversation in the car. We talked about having another baby, and she said, well, it's going to have to be now or never. And so we made the choice, and we took it from there, and the rest is history. And that's a whole other story in itself that will definitely be going into the next video when we talk about my first deployment. But to give you the big points of all this, guys, to sum it all up, I'd really say that my first duty station experience was eye-opening. At that point, I was sort of enjoying myself in the Army, but it was still really hard. There was still a lot to learn. I was still at the bottom of the totem pole, so it didn't really matter what I thought or wanted, especially back in those days of the Army. And it was really hard financially, especially for me because, brand new married, 3 kids already, still young, and away all the time, not making enough money. It was difficult. I'm not going to lie. It was extremely hard. But going through all those experiences absolutely helped me to build a sense of resilience and help me learn that if you just keep at something and you keep chipping away as much as you possibly can at a goal, whatever that goal might be, wherever you see yourself in the future, as long as you're continuing to chip away at that, you will eventually get to that goal. That goal is only so far away, whether it's paying the next bill or getting the next rank or having a baby, or maybe it's even a school you want to go to. It's really anything. All these goals are absolutely attainable, but depending on your situation at the time, that's really going to dictate on how much work you're going to have to put into going towards that goal and eventually achieving it. And for me, starting off at the very bottom with nothing to show for himself, I was just a basic trainee, brand new married, didn't have any money in savings, wasn't making enough money. I was like down there. You know what I mean? I am crawling. I was below sea level at that point. I had to climb out of it to even try to get ahead. But the key is to never quit the climb. You have to keep climbing or you're never going to see the sunlight. And that's really the biggest takeaways I got from the first couple of years in the Army, especially from my first unit and being a junior enlisted soldier. I also got to work with some of the best guys, man. Some of my best memories in the Army all stem from my first unit. A lot of them were a bunch of goobers, and maybe they're watching this right now, but I still think about them all the time. Me and the wife still reference them all the time. We think about them when we have get-togethers, and we reminisce on some of the parties we had together and some of the good times, stuff like that. And then lastly, I want to say that my first unit was absolutely different than any other unit I've been in the Army since. So it's really important to remember, regardless of your experience with your first unit, you can't judge the Army based on your experience in your first unit, because every unit's different. Every duty station is different. Every single experience in the Army is going to be different. And I learned that very quickly in my career. Well, at least after the first couple years. So I think I've talked your ears off enough on this video. Like I said, I want to transition from this into going into my first deployment, and that should definitely be its own video in itself, because there's a lot that goes into that and what that experience was like. But if you guys could do me a favor, let me know if this was beneficial to you, and let me know if you have any questions that are specific to some of the things that we went over in this video. Because again, I do want all this to be helpful to you guys watching it. I don't want it to just be me trying to tell you a story about myself. I want this to be like a mentorship opportunity. I want you to derive benefit from these stories. And also let me know if there's any of you out there that are more interested in talking about marriage life in the military. I want to try and do a sit down with my wife, and we can talk about some of the experiences that we've had over the years, and some of the advice that I think we could give that might be beneficial to you. So let me know if you're interested in something like that as well. But besides that, guys, I hope that was a good second video and it's a good second take on this. Again, I think it's awesome that I've had all the support from you guys. I'm really glad to see that you guys are getting benefit from this. And besides that, I've got nothing else for you. I'll see you on the next one.